I want to try and clear up some of the confusion surrounding the RNG in the Generation 2 games when it comes to shiny hunting. So I have some code pulled up, and we're also going to go frame by frame in an emulator looking at the RNG values in real time in the memory viewer. And hopefully this will clear up a lot of the confusion. But before we go into the code, I want to make sure we all understand some things that I have written out here. So for one, this is just something to start off with. Gen 2 RNG does not use seeds, right? So compared to the future games where a seed is used in the random number generator, Generation 2 does not use seeds at all. So next, I want to make sure everyone understands 8-bit numbers. So these are the numbers that we're going to be dealing with when we look at the random number generator. So 8-bit numbers range from 0 to 255, right? So 256 total different values that they can be, and it's 0 to 255. And they overflow and underflow. So what does that mean? So let's say we have 255, that's our max value, and we want to add 1 to it. Well, we can't do 256 because it's out of the range, right? So what happens is instead of getting 256, we jump all the way back to 0. The number has overflowed. And the same thing happens going in reverse. So 0 minus 1, we don't have -1, that's out of our range. So we jump back to 255. And the same thing, the numbers carry over if you're doing a larger amount. So 255 plus 2, it overflows to 0, then adds the remaining 1 to give you 1. Same thing in reverse. 0 minus 2 is 254. So let's look at the code really quick. We have right here the code that generates the DVs on a random encounter. And you can see it does 2 calls to battle random. Battle random is right here. And we don't really need to look at this code at all because all it does is call another battle random function. In this case, underscore battle random, which is right here. And there's kind of a lot going on here, but luckily for us, with random encounters, we don't care about any of this stuff because all of this stuff is specifically for link battles. So in our case, it checks if we're in a link battle, and when we're not in a link battle, such as doing random encounters, it just jumps to this regular random method. And that is right here. So here is the regular random number generator. You can stop and read this if you'd like, but I'm just going to go over it in hopefully pretty simple terms that everyone can understand. So specifically, we want to look at 2 numbers here, which are rdiv and hrandom sub. For our purposes, with random encounters, this value here, hrandom add, is never used. So we can just completely ignore this. This whole part right here is never used. This is what's important to us. Now, we don't really have to look at the code. Obviously, most of you probably have no clue what this means, but I'm going to try and explain it. So rdiv, that's explained right here, right? It's a register, which means it's part of the Game Boy hardware itself, right? It's not exclusive to the game. It is part of the Game Boy hardware, and it increments at 16,384 hertz, hertz being times per second, right? So it counts up by 1 16,000 times per second. So it starts at 0, then it adds 1, it adds 1 again, it adds 1 again, it adds 1 again. It just keeps adding 1, and it does that 16,000 times per second. Now we have hrandom sub, and this is our actual random value that is being generated. In our case, it starts at 0 when we boot up the console, and as you'll see later, when we soft reset, it does reset to 0. However, because rdiv does not reset, at least upon doing a soft reset, rdiv will not reset. The random values will continue to be different upon soft resets, right? So it's not like Emerald where you can't do soft resets, but it is like Emerald where it starts at the same RNG upon turning on the game for the first time. So let's go over how this actually works, right? So we have rdiv, which counts up, and let's just say, for example, rdiv is equal to 20, right? And let's say hrandom sub is equal to 40, right? We'll make it nice and easy. So in this case, the way it works is it literally just subtracts whatever the value of rdiv is from hrandom sub, and that is your next random value. And the reason this seems random to us, again, is because rdiv counts up extremely fast, 16,000 times per second. So what we'd end up with is we would do hrandom sub minus rdiv, which would give us 20. So now we have hrandom sub is equal to 20. And this would be the value that we get from this random call. And again, these are 8-bit values, so 0 to 255. And if we say call it again, so now let's say rdiv is equal to 15, right? So in this case, we will then do, again, hrandom sub minus rdiv, which will equal 5. So this will be our next random value, and so on. So this hrandom sub is the value used to generate the DVs on a Pokemon. And if we go back to this code, you'll see that, well, there's 2 calls. We have more than 2 DVs, but there's only 2 random calls, right? So how does that work? So let's say we generated a random number and our result is 32. So what it does is it takes a number and sees how many times can we fit 16 into it. In this case, with 32, it is 2 times. And that leaves us with 0, right? Because 16 times 2 is 32, and 32 minus 32 equals 0, right? So in this case, we would end up with, I believe the order is attack would be 2, and defense would be 0. I might have this order swapped, but you could see what it does is it takes the number of times that 16 can fit into the number, and that becomes one of the DVs, and then whatever is remaining becomes the other DV. So let's try 36, right? 36, same thing, 2 times. So 16 times 2 is 32, and then 36 minus 32 is 4. So in this case, our attack would be 2, and our defense would be 4. So that's how the DVs are generated, using just 2 random numbers. And now let's look in-game at how these random numbers look in real time. So this is hrandom add and hrandom sub right here. Again, these 2 numbers. And if you'll recall, for our case, we only care about hrandom sub. So I have the emulator paused right now, and you can see I can advance frame by frame, and we can watch those change in real time. See, if I unpause, they change very, very fast. So what we're going to do now is we're going to let's do a hard reset, right? So we're going to do a hard reset. This is the equivalent of powering off the console and powering it back on, or in the case of a 3DS Virtual Console, this is the same as using the touch screen to restart the game. So you can see as I advance frame by frame, the RNG value is currently at 0, and that's hrandom sub. It has been reset to 0. And as I continue to advance frame by frame, you'll see our first value is BC. So I can continue advancing frame by frame, right? And it's going to keep changing, but just remember the first value was BC. So we're going to reset again, and we're going to go frame by frame. And again, this is the equivalent of powering on and off the console. And you can see, once again, BC is the first value, which is actually 188 is the numerical value. This is in hexadecimal. And you can see this is hrandom add, which also is the same. So 44, that's what it was last time. So we can unpause, and we'll let the game run a little bit. Then I'm going to pause again, And I'm going to do a soft reset and go frame by frame through the soft reset. Oops, that's the wrong buttons. There we go. So I'm going to go frame by frame until it resets. You can see the values will now stop, and this is where it's actually doing the reset. It takes a few frames before, and you can see now they've reset. So it has actually done the soft reset at this point, and the values are back to 0. But if I continue advancing frame by frame, you'll see we got a completely different starting value. So soft resets do work, and the reason for that is because, again, RDiv is part of the Game Boy hardware itself. It will only reset when the console is powered off and powered back on. So this is why soft resets work, but hard resets do not. And hopefully that clears up most of the confusion around the Generation 2 RNG. You can also see that the clock is not referenced at all in the RNG. The clock has nothing to do with it. So there's nothing about, having the clock unset and then setting it every time you boot up the game. You should be fine to do that. Personally, I'd say my recommendation is to boot the game, wait a random amount of time, and do a soft reset, and then start hunting. That's how I would do it, and that's what I did when I hunted for my Marowak, which, well, wasn't my target, but it's what I got, and I'm happy with it. So yeah, hopefully that clears up most of the confusion. If there's any questions, you can just leave a comment. I'll try to answer them. Hopefully I didn't forget anything. See you guys.